I remember my first time descending down the Great Hollow in the original Dark Souls. My friend told me that this disappointing giant tree that I had found had not one but two illusionary walls inside it, and from there, I met one of the hardest bosses in the Dark Souls series to date. Gravity! After carefully negotiating my way down the trunk and adding many deaths to my tally. And sidebar, why are there basilisks in here? I mean, they can't even climb that well. Is this where they originated from? Did they curse the tree? What implications does this say about the nature of the curse? Anyway, once I finally reached the bottom of this place and had a brief respite with the peaceful puff caps. Okay, actually, once I reached the bottom and absolutely booked it past the murder fungus, I was met by this. This place was familiar to me. And not just because I didn't skip the opening cutscene. As a child, like many other kids, I would often watch and rewatch movies. The crown jewel of these many films was Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Well, it was actually Castle in the Sky because of its absolutely insane and awesome train scene. Like, oh, just the best thing ever. But I watched a lot of Nausicaa, and this place looks a lot like what's underneath the toxic jungle. In fact, the game bears such a close resemblance to the film that you literally have to descend through a terrible poison swamp to make your way down to the barren shores of Ash Lake. At this point, I was delighted, and my mind was racing. I hadn't known it at the time, but this would be the first of many parallels between Ghibli and From Software's work. Also, for Ghibli, I'll say Ghibli sometimes. It's out of my control. It's just whatever comes out of the mouth. I'll start off this section by saying there's a really good and free 4-hour documentary on Hayao Miyazaki that I would highly recommend if you want more insight onto his background, mentality, and personality. And I'll go ahead and link it in the description, and I'll also try to link it with the iCard if I can figure that out. Much of what I cover here will be an abridged version of what they dive into in part 2 of that documentary, starting at around 13 minutes and 52 seconds. But Hayao Miyazaki was born into a very different world. He was born in the midst of Tokyo in 1941, right after the United States joined World War II. And some of his earliest memories were of bombed-out cities and being forced to move from safe haven to safe haven. He saw the effects of war firsthand as some of his core childhood memories, and on top of this, he had digestive problems that left him physically weakened to the extent that his doctor told him he wouldn't live to 20. He was consistently the slowest in sports and always felt like a burden. This was compounded with his mother developing spinal tuberculosis when he was only 6, which left her bedridden most of the rest of her life. Throughout this childhood, his father and mother were huge inspirations, with the former dropping out of the war to be with his wife and child and sharing a lifetime love of film with his son, and the latter having a very close and influential relationship, teaching him to stand up for what he believed in, even if it wasn't what society expected. In many of Miyazaki's films, he would have a character clearly inspired or reminiscent of his mother. His background clearly and directly informed his art in this way. And after graduating from university in 1963, he got into the animation studio Toei Animation. It was here that his talent, drive, and imagination was evident, which granted him an immense sense of belonging. Through entertaining people, he felt useful, and in the next decade and a half, he would go on to work on amazing animation after amazing animation. He ran into trouble heading film adaptations, though, and after a long run of rejections, he was told by a friend to draw Nausicaa the Valley of the Wind, and upon its success, he was convinced to head the film adaptation. During this time, his mother, who had been a direct inspiration for Nausicaa, passed away. While grieving, Hayao poured his heart and soul into the film, which was received as a masterpiece and paved the way for him to continue directing films. Springboarding off Nausicaa's success, Hayao Miyazaki and 3 of his close friends founded the production company Studio Ghibli, and together they produced groundbreaking animations unlike anything the world had seen before. These films spoke to feelings and issues that were, at their core, fundamentally human. They took the form of narrative themes such as the destructive futility of war and the true power of love. It's no wonder that, with themes so relatable, Miyazaki and Ghibli were able to find adoring audiences across the globe. When looking into Hidetaka Miyazaki, it's important to note that he's a man who values his private life, so therefore we won't be prying into anything that isn't already public knowledge or stated in interviews. We'll have no speculation or rumors. Similar to Hayao, Hidetaka was born into a family with few options. His parents couldn't afford him books or manga for entertainment, so the young Miyazaki would often go to the library and just check out whatever was available. This resulted in him getting a wide variety of inspirations from a huge range of reference material. In lieu of other ambitions, he found himself pursuing a degree in social science, and upon graduation, he considered applying at a game development studio, but instead chose the US IT company Oracle Corporation for the stable pay, even though there wasn't any passion in it. After hearing about the game Ico from friends and feeling a deep connection while playing through it, he knew he needed to be a game designer. He found a position at From Software, the only game development studio he could find that would hire somebody with no experience at age 29, and he began planning on the game Armored Core Last Raven, later directing Armored Core 4 and its sequel Armored Core 4 Answer. Although he was the director of these games, he didn't have as much creative freedom as he liked. He was working in a pre-established world and didn't have full control of the types of story that could be told. Although, From Software's next game would be his big break, with Since he joined the project after the company had already written it off as a failure, he was allowed full creative control. And with this freedom, he constructed a fully unique combat system and core gameplay loop that still serves as the framework of the Soulsborne from Ring series today. I don't know how Elden Ring fits in the Soulsborne. Anyway, Demon's Souls was overall considered a success, especially after tallying up international sales. His next game, however, the critically acclaimed Dark Souls, was exactly the home run he needed to land himself the position of company president back in 2014. Anywho, with this history out of the way, we can jump back into Nausicaa and why I was so happy to see something so similar to it in Dark Souls 1. I should probably give a quick overview for the people who haven't seen it. The world of Nausicaa is a post-apocalypse, wherein humanity is slowly re-emerging from the perceived end of the world, and attempting to rebuild it. This is a feudal setting filled with various kingdoms and principalities, where the average person living in the world is your humble everyday farmer. There are holdovers from the pre-apocalyptic era, including some advanced flying machines and really cool gliders, as well as flamethrowers. But all in all, where people live is mostly divorced from the technology of the world that came before it. Nausicaa's other defining setting is the toxic jungle, a heavily polluted and mutated forest, which is the home of a myriad of beautiful yet dangerous creatures, and air that can kill you in minutes if you enter without a mask. Underneath this is a serene lake with ancient calcified trees, slowly purifying the land above. It's a striking and unforgettable setting that I can't help be reminded of whenever I see dead gargantuan trees. The story of Nausicaa itself revolves around a young princess who sees the beauty of the toxic jungle and wants to protect both it and her kingdom, which becomes difficult when the warmongering Talmekians decide her kingdom must be subjugated and the jungle must be destroyed. Through a series of fights, flying and breaking bread with the enemy, Nausicaa is able to stop a ploy from the Talmekians to reawaken an old super weapon. Okay, it kind of stops itself, but that's one of the big themes of the movie. And she's able to prevent a massive herd of Ohm from demolishing her home. Jumping back to the pure forest that I talked about earlier, In Nausicaa, this pure forest shows us that nature had a way of healing itself, and that given time, life would find a way to heal or adapt. That even through all of humanity's power, we were still finite, and we couldn't begin to comprehend how long these had been here, and how long they would outlast us. In Dark Souls, this feels remarkably different. Ash Lake is much more of a corpse. The trees are dead or demolished, at least the ones we can interact with. They stand as a testament to Gwyn's absolute victory over the dragons, and the society he built literally upon their bones. It also shows that the foundation of this world of fire is bloodshed and slaughter, and that even after all of these years, the foundation is incapable of healing. It can stand, but it can't heal. This is where I need to ask. Is Hidetaka Miyazaki, and From Software by extension, borrowing only the aesthetics from Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli, without interrogating the themes tied to them? Or is this a dialogue between the works? Before answering this, we should pump the brakes and look at some more parallels between these creators' works. Just now seeing how prominent my rapidly retreating hairline is. Most of my best role models were people who didn't have much up top but huge beards. Look, they're just migrating south for the winter. Let's go over Castle in the Sky and then the gargantuan that is Elden Ring. Castle in the Sky isn't necessarily a post-apocalyptic world, but it is definitely one that has had technological degradation, which through the intro sequence we see is either by choice or by the destructive power of nature. And can we talk about how competent this intro scene is? The tapestry visuals clearly show you that this is something that happened in the past. The easy to follow steps that it takes that makes creating a flying city look easy. It's just so good at what it does. In the present day, there are many abandoned buildings, both ancient and recent, with many of the establishing shots clearly showing that the landscape is dotted with thrown-over craters. Actually, as I'm looking back over the footage, a lot of these craters are actually mines that have been abandoned, so the point is a bit shakier. I'll continue saying that there are craters because Laputa was definitely a civilization with super weapons that could fire below it, but take this part with a bit more of a grain of salt. Now miners, soldiers, and the occasional pirate are what inhabit these spaces. The heart of this movie, Laputa, the Castle in the Sky, is as mythical as it is impossible. It's a bastion of treasure, technology, and magic that has been lost for centuries, and presumably what we see being abandoned in the intro sequence. The plot is driven by the military being led by a general who's being puppeted by the spy master, Muska, who is chasing Shita, a descendant of Laputan royalty, to have her open the way back to the Castle in the Sky itself. She meets a boy, Patsu, who wants to make it to Laputa because that's what his family had been trying to do. And he's the one who catches her when she falls from an airship. They get chased by pirates who are also after her because they want the treasure of the Castle in the Sky. There's a train scene, and like, why doesn't any Souls game have a train scene? Can we talk about this, FromSoft? Like, what do I need to do to get a train scene in the next game that you make? Anyway, Shita gets captured, meets an old automata that fell from the sky, which reawakens and could be discussed for hours on hours just by itself. Is it just following its own programming, or did it develop free will? You know, we'll talk more about the automata later. But Patsu joins up with the pirates, they rescue Shita, but not our boy. And they're off. They make it to the pirate ship, and apparently Eggman is on board.
Did I hear a rockin' stone?
They fly, there's a huge storm, we see Laputa itself, and there's another robot who doesn't die this time, thank God. Muska betrays the military and makes them all fall to their deaths. The pirates are able to escape, and the city itself falls apart after Patsu and Shita use the self-destruct sequence. There's a lot to say here about the preservation of technology versus letting the past burn, but I think I'll save those for later sections or other videos on their own. Suffice it to say, this movie is amazing, and if you haven't seen it, you should definitely watch it. Now, You may be wondering how this relates to the story and world of Elden Ring. Oh, Elden Ring. And in order to understand the parallels I'm going to cover, we first need to dive into the world of a ring most Elden. Whew, let's take it from the top one last time. Puppy? Alright, he's just laying on the floor. Elden Ring's world, at least where we have concern with it, begins with the Erd Tree. Actually, autocorrect wants this to be Nerd Tree. Sorry everyone. It's what's at the center of Elden Ring's world. It's a mystical holy tree that brought great power, prosperity, and godhood to the lands between. It's believed that the Erd Tree is not of this world and was actually sent by the Greater Will, which is this world's capital G god. It's more complicated than that, but that's the simple version. From here, a pantheon of god spawn, with some of the most confusing names for a first playthrough. I mean, we have Marika, Melania, Mikola, Margit, Morgat, which may be the same person, Mog and Mogwin, Millicent, and that's just a non-exhaustive list of one branch of the family tree. It gets really difficult to parse who these people are. I mean, I get the whole historical accuracy of naming conventions, but come on, like whoever, I don't know if it was George or from please. And a lot of what you learn about these people are from other NPCs talking about them. So if you happen to mishear or miss a spelling of a certain name, you might get a couple people confused. I mean, I remember near the end of the first game, I had a couple of people confused and was blindsided by a certain second to last boss, thinking that he should have been a soulless husk. So to say the least, this game is very dense, but we can eat through it one bite at a time and just look at what pertains to us. So let's start with Queen Marika. She is the goddess tied to the Erd Tree most closely, and the mother of much of the Pantheon. She also is the one who shattered the Elden Ring, oopsie, which broke a thing called the Golden Order, which is a set of cosmic rules that, among other things, keeps dead people dead. Around the same time, one of her sons, Godwin the Golden, was killed, which was a big deal since gods weren't supposed to be able to die. If you're getting some Ragnarok starting after Baldur died vibes, then yeah, good. I mean, we have a huge earth tree here as well, so, you know. Anyway, after Godwin's death, a huge war known as the Shattering started, with demigods all trying to pick up the pieces and become the next Elden Lord to repair the Golden Order the way they saw fit. Unfortunately, everyone just kind of fought till they fell over, or went insane, or decided to do something else, and the only one still trying to pick back up the pieces, Morgat, was barred from entering the Erd Tree, possibly because of his status of being an omen, which is a whole nother can of worms, but essentially somebody spurned from the gift of grace. Due to this, the tarnished undead, who were banished from the land at an earlier point in history, were called back to see if they could become Elden Lords through the gift of grace that they still have, and that, of course, includes the player character. So from here on out, there will be spoilers of in-game events, so if you want to skip those, here's the timestamp, but with guidance from Elena, who acts as our maiden, and some slight pointing in the right direction from the Two Fingers, and their finger maidens, people who interpret them, the player character's Tarnished goes on a globe-trotting adventure, meeting a myriad group of NPCs and hopefully being able to find them again without having to look it up. Through determination, the help of others, and I don't know, some other third thing, the player character is able to gain enough great runes to make it to the capital and fix the Elden Ring. But actually, the door is locked and there's no way through. So I guess they'll burn the tree instead and then end up in a flying place. Oh, well, this is interesting, isn't it? A certain castle? And then we end up here. Alright, so we're finally back in the capital, and we need to kill this guy? I mean, I know who he is, but why is he fighting me? This is also the dude I got confused when I was talking about earlier, thought he should be a soulless husk, but that was this guy. Anyway, now he's dead, and we're going in here, and So we beat Radagon in one shot. And we beat the Elden Beast in one shot, trademark. And we move on to discuss some more similarities. So one thing I glossed over was Elden Ring's Flying Fortress, the crumbling Farum Azula, which has a constant companion of an ever-raging storm. Some might call it a castle, a moving castle? No. But the similarities between this place and Castle in the Sky are numerous, and why we needed to kind of give an overview because this comes up pretty near the end of the game. There are some pretty striking differences between Farum Azula and Lapita as well, so let's go through some of them. We have pieces that have been broken off with automata that still follow their protection protocols, we have a crater on the world map where you can see that it likely took off from, and we have a massive flying castle with a huge storm raging as a main feature, although each of them have interesting contrasts. We see an area most similar to Farum Azula on the Elden Ring world map itself, if we want to try to figure out where Farum Azula might have taken off from if it was on the ground at any point. We see an area pretty similar in the north of Caelid by the Bestial Sanctum, which also has an NPC in common with Farum Azula.
Tarnished. Why wouldst thou? Why?
And there's Rebel Dawning Landscape with ruin shards, which are clearly meant to be from Farum Azula if you look at their item descriptions. And by one of the first sets of these ruins that most people will find on a playthrough, a damaged automata can be found. These automata are one of our first comparison points. In Elden Ring, they seem to have a one-track mind for murder with no breaks. They don't show heightened signs of intelligence or decision-making, although our interaction points are fairly limited, but unlike in Castle in the Sky, these automata don't need to stop and process this situation. No automata I know of in Elden Ring has any purpose other than defend a location and murder those who approach, or sit in rest mode where they'll try to murder anyone who disturbs their slumber. Assumably there is a way to redefine who the automata are defending or who they should be attacking, since Elden Ring's automata are found throughout the many enemy factions that we face. But looking at the Forgotten Robot Soldier in Castle in the Sky, it has found new purpose, and it's so adorable. I can't believe how fast this dude brought me to tears on my first rewatch. This might be a nurture versus nature argument, whether or not people have the capacity to shrug off what they were initially taught to do, and also whether created life has the possibility of developing its own set of morals. Wherein Castle in the Sky says yes, and Elden Ring, at least in this instance, gives us a hard no. This makes sense, given that Elden Ring's world is a simply bleaker place. There's a compelling case that the golems from Elden Ring aren't from Farum Azula, and instead they were part of an invading force from a different ancient civilization, one that is long forgotten now, but that potentially assaulted Farum Azula either when it took to the skies or just in a battle that caused much of the rubble to shake off. When exploring the area, we don't really find any of the golems within the city, just beastmen and dragons and goddamn birds. But the golems instead are found throughout the kingdom, throughout the different areas of the lands between, in defensive locations clearly put to use as defenders of ancient things, like this nice big pot. Looking at Elden Ring's world at large, there aren't any places where people aren't fighting to survive, and life just kind of sucks. While in Castle in the Sky, things are pretty different. It's not to say that there aren't struggles, but at least there are comforts in life, and miners make a great case study of this. In Castle in the Sky, the miners are seen as the dust of the earth, honest folk who have toiled away their whole lives because it's just what they've had to do. They are treated as an afterthought to the militaristic society that they live under, who are more concerned with raiding a sky temple to make those in power even wealthier than looking out for, the people that they rule. From our small window into their day-to-day lives, we can see that they live really hard but somewhat enriching lives. But their work is fickle and poverty is always a threat. Our first interaction with them shows that they are barely making ends meet currently. The systems that they use are run down and always in need of repair. I mean, there's 3 breaks within the 3 minutes that we see it, and the silver that they're mining for just isn't there. The film explicitly tells us that if things keep going like this, we'll all be starving soon. And judging by the number of deserted buildings, including what seems to be an entire abandoned town within the ravine the mine is placed above, yeah, that checks out. We see abandoned mines with whole empty towns around them that have been built over. I mean, this has happened before in the past. The town seems to ebb and flow wherever the mining is good, and whenever that happens, people will leave. The city in the ravine is much bigger and was probably more prosperous in its heyday, but all that silver has been mined, all of it has dried up, all of it has gone to the people in power, so which just leaves the scraps. Now, this may seem bad, but the miners within Elden Ring are, perhaps unsurprisingly, much worse off. We rarely see them outside of their mines, and their skin is caked with so much grime and rocks to the point where, if you're one-handing a weapon, it'll just bounce right off from impact. All they do is toil away at mineral deposits, attacking anyone who would dare interrupt them. There's no respite within family, there's no hope of anything better. There's only the mine and an array of different factions holding the whip. These mines are also good. We can just find smithing stones on the walls of each and every one, so they aren't dried up. But it's not the miners who will reap the benefit. In the boss room of every one of these mines is room piled high with gold on the floor. I mean, too bad it's not a currency we can use, but we can see where all of the wealth is heading. And what's being mined? Well, each work is pretty explicit. In Castle in the Sky, silver is being mined, although the Laputans in the past, well, if we take it from Uncle Palm, it was Ethereum, and no, not the cryptocurrency, but what was used to power the ancient city. And apparently it has a voice of its own, because it speaks too loudly, too sadly. And the power of the crystal seems to want to return to the earth. It should remind us that we come from the earth, and from the earth we must return. This means Studio Ghibli is very explicitly saying that power comes from nature. The power that we have is something that is natural, and eventually it will need to return to that state. In Elden Ring, what's being mined is pretty different. We have useless gold, but we have the much more important smithing stones, the most powerful of which come from dragons, and we also have crystals, which come from this guy, as well as gravity magic and glintstone. There's a clear delineation from where power comes from in each world. Within Castle in the Sky, power is granted by the earth, while in Elden Ring, power is either alien or ancient, something that we can wield but isn't a part of us by default. And put a pin in this will come up later. And speaking of ancient things that can inform us on the nature of the world, Castle in the Sky has many old, dilapidated, and abandoned stone buildings dotting the landscape, as well as newer wooden homes that the current inhabitants are living in. This struck me on my initial viewing by really giving off the old Roman stoneworking that we just can't recreate given our current technology vibes, and also that might be haunted by the alien spirits of the past. Those are common vibes, right? There are areas within Elden Ring where this is true, but, well, honestly, there isn't a ton of rebuilding happening in that world. There isn't many places that are doing just fine. Mostly it's ruins and plenty of flavors. We have ruins so old that erosion is uncovering them. An artist's abandoned shack, ruins that are found underground in a pretty Greco-Roman-y style, and we have an artist's shack, we have flying ruins kept aloft. Sorry, the dust from the flying ruins. Ugh. We have an artist shack, and we have flying ruins that are being kept aloft by a storm. Speaking of which, finally we get to this storm. Can you tell the difference between these two storms? Yeah, one's in the middle of the structure, and the other one is on the outside. Not only is this some really cool environmental storytelling, but it also has some interesting implications. If Elden Ring's flying city was at the center of the map, then what was at the center of the world before the Erd Tree became, like the kind of symbolic center, would be this storm. If Elden Ring's Majula was at the center of the map, and let's just assume that it got kind of slid over just for the sake of clarity, but if it was in the center of the map and this is where it took off, then that would be the center of Elden Ring's world. a raging storm with no respite. I mean, hell, the Eye of the Storm isn't even accessible unless you go back in time, and then it has an ancient dragon, which is the progenitor of god-slaying weapons. And also, apparently, the storm has been raging for time immaterium, with this dragon being the original Elden Lord, so it just kind of thematically makes sense that it is what would be at the center of the world. Also, like, everything going on with that dragon, kind of a can of worms we're not going to open in this video. Suffice it to say, Fair Majula's storm is housed within, while Castle in the Skies is outside. In narrative, it's been used to cloak it from who would seek its ancient power, and symbolically, this tracks. It becomes one with nature, a phenomena that even though it hasn't returned to the earth, it has become a clouded, half-remembered history that isn't important to the daily lives of the inhabitants of this world. In Castle in the Sky, the inhabitants of Laputa chose to leave. This is shown in the intro animation as well as through Shita's family history. Future Max coming in with a quick correction. The intro sequence shows some of the flying cities crumbling due to a sky-rending storm and crashing down with people filing out, but Laputa was spared this fate. That is the reason that I believe the Laputans chose to leave and bury it in the past. The inhabitants recognized that the power was too much and chose to put it behind them. Elden Ring's Fair Majula did not. It was a place of an ancient cataclysmic battle where it was shattered, yet people still live there as it has become a home of the banished, or just the Beastmen's ancestral home. Each of these does show the truth about its world and the outlook on ours. Ghibli seems to hope that we can put the devastation of warfare, guns and bombs behind us, while From Software sees it as a foundational part of the world which we inhabit, and has a history longer than can be remembered and which still attracts new blood. At this point, I think regardless of whether or not it's intentional, these works and creators have engaged with the dialogue through similar aesthetics. Ghibli's work shows that human nature can and needs to change, that we can put peace and love first to make the world someplace worthwhile for everyone. The Souls series, on the other hand, distinctly disagrees, painting the world as a bleaker place, going through the motions set out by an old guard that has been making decisions long before the player character is alive and has agency. In this world, one can have power, but only if it's enabled through or co-ops existing power structures, fundamentally changing the people who harness them to be less human, less empathetic. They have to take on something alien in order to have power in the world. Major spoilers for the end of Elden Ring ahead, and here's a timestamp if you want to skip it. Let's talk about the Elden Beast in the room. No. Not only does this thing share striking visual similarities to Princess Mononoke's Nightwalker, but it also has a boss room evocative of a Blessed Ash Lake. This is a lot to parse, so let's break it into pieces and see if we can see any common threads. First off, lore. In Princess Mononoke, the Nightwalker is the physical manifestation of death to the living and life to the dead. Although much like its other form, the Deer God, it is seen as a creature who acts beyond the many characters' understanding, but clearly has rationale for how and why it gives or takes life. Learning more about the Elden Beast is going to be best through different lore items, so diving into the Elden Star's incantation, it states that long ago, the Greater World sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. The Remembrance, the item that you get after you defeat it, states that it was the vassal beast of the Greater Will, and living incarnation of the concept of order. One of the weapons you can craft from it states that it was a sword wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal. Thoughts on what this weapon portents are many and varied. Some consider it the mark of great sin, a sign of great devastation, while some think of it as the end of an age, while others, the beginning. We do have an unreliable narrator here with "it is said" and "thoughts are many and varied," but it's clear that the Elden Beast is alien in nature, through it coming from the Greater Will, and through it sharing a cosmic aesthetic, especially through some of its attacks with another endgame boss, Astel, Natural Born of the Void, which is very clearly an outer god. It has the power and ability to reshape the remains of gods into tools, and has a vested interest in stopping the player character from disrupting its golden order, even though it is already broken. A very interesting similarity is both the Nightwalker and the Elden Beast are beyond our protagonist's ability to interact with until something is taken from them. A piece of their power is ripped from them. The juxtaposition between these two creatures is how they react. The Nightwalker isn't directly attacking anyone. Instead, it kind of flails about, extending its reach to attempt to reclaim its head. Seems to be more of an automatic response, like a single-minded creature than a rational actor. The Elden Beast, on the other hand, fashions and uses the power of a dead god and the greater will to try to defeat us. There is thought here. We are the one disrupting what it is trying to protect, and it won't let us usurp its power or its order. Ironically, the one trying to defeat us fails, while the Nightwalker, through some help, is able to reunite with its head. Now we'll talk trees one last time. Why are there these immense golden trees in the final boss arena, and why are we on a lake? If we extend what we've garnered from Nausicaa and Ash Lake, then we need to know if these trees are alive, and what they might be supporting. Unfortunately, there's no concrete lore for either of these. Visually, they take after our Erd tree, scars and all. They've been battered and weathered, but they haven't been through any of the actions we took against our Erd tree in the later parts of the game. My thoughts here is that this could either be the Erd trees of other worlds. I mean, if the greater will sent down the Elden Beast on a golden star, then who's to say that it hasn't done so before or since to other places where life found a way? This means that the combat arena could be a manifestation of the greater will's fidelity, those who pay tribute and empower it. Alternatively, the trees could be a representation of the smaller Erd trees that we see throughout the lands between, and how they exist within the perception of the Elden Beast. Lastly, it could be a spiritual manifestation of many of the calcified and broken trees that we see in places like Nokron, and if this is the case, that's a whole other rabbit hole that involves the original gods of this world, and the reason for Nokron being underground, and why those trees are probably in the state that they are today, and I don't think that this is the time to get into that. Especially for a first video essay. But regardless, they must be supporting something, and I believe that to be the greater will. Now, if we jump back to Princess Mononoke, the Deer God, or the Nightwalker, holds dominion over life and death, while in Elden Ring it's the greater will and the golden order that it created that creates the rules for how death works in the world. One thing I find fascinating is, in many of From Software's games, we get to see what a world where the Nightwalker's head wasn't returned could look like. I mean, in Elden Ring itself, since the Golden Order was shattered, with the death of Godwyn the Golden, death has been a lot looser in the lands between. I mean, we come back, our enemies come back, the loathsome dung eater, the maniacal manure muncher, the notorious number 2 nibbler is back, and the result has been more desolation. Much like in Dark Souls, a world with death unending causes one to lose themselves over time. I do think Princess Mononoke was ready to grapple with this, since the Deer God had the power to bring anyone back, but it only used that power in specific scenarios. I believe this power was only used when it knew the person still had a strong will to live and a drive to make the world a better place, someone who wouldn't lose themselves and who still had the will to continue forward. To cap it off, there is definitely a dialogue between these two works. As described before, Ghibli's works paints the world as a place defined by those who came before it, through the bombed out landscapes of Castle in the Sky, to the toxic jungle of Nausicaa being the creation of the technologically advanced society that came before, to the dwindling animal gods of Princess Mononoke. Often the plot revolves around navigating the mistakes of the forebearers. Nature, understanding with your enemy, and love are the solutions, regardless of how hard it is to get there. Nature is the original form that has been taken by the world. Even in Castle in the Sky, nature is what the floating castle returns to when it sheds its technology and only keeps the floaty rock trademark core. This isn't to say that nature is unchanging, just that it's a fundamental part of the human experience. Now, From Software changes the conversation by asking, what if nature wasn't natural? In Dark Souls, Gwyn disrupts the natural order at the start of the first game by prolonging a doomed age of fire. In Bloodborne, The world is just a staging area for old gods to perform a cold war, and in Elden Ring, the fundamental rules of the world, like death, have been rewritten by an outer alien god known as the Greater Will. In From Software's works, understanding falls by the wayside as well, with the world being too difficult for people to be able to look outside of themselves most of the time, with the characters that do take the time to do that standing out. I mean, there's a reason that Solaire is so well known and so well beloved. This is also a big reason that bosses must be fought instead of finding another way to resolve the conflict. They're too focused on whatever worldview they have. They can't stop to think about the player's perspective, or they disregard it as something unworthy. And love is found very rarely in these games, and is almost always inaccessible by the player character. In Demon's Souls, Maiden Asteria's love and compassion showed her the truth of the world, which is why she accepted the soul of a demon. In Dark Souls 1, Sif loved Artorias, and that's why there's no choice but to fight her. In Dark Souls 2, Aslana loved the Ivory King, and that's why she sealed him away. In Bloodborne, Gascoigne loved his wife, and we use that against him as he's losing himself, through a memento given to us by his child. And Godwin the Golden, a god that was loved by all's death, is what began the Shattering, the worst war to ever be seen. Within the narratives of FromSoft, love is many things, but it's never a solution. And that's that. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I really appreciate it. This was my first video essay, so I feel like I did a pretty dang good job. And if you agreed, please do all the YouTube things to make this video look good in the algorithm or whatever. Hit subscribe if you liked that red button. And if you're interested in looking at more of this beautiful beard, expect some more videos down the pipeline over the next few months. I'm not really sure what my video cadence is yet, but I'll be working on another one of these essays soon enough. And if you want to see me more regularly, I stream on Twitch every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday from 3 to 6 Central Standard Time. Right now we've been working on a no-hit Dark Souls 2 run, which is exactly what it sounds like, and we're so close. We have made it through the game only getting hit once, 3 separate times. Oh, one last thing. I'm going to be participating in a scuffed speedrunning tournament, which is a bunch of people who are not speedrunners by trade, who are going to be trying to speedrun in order to raise some money for charities. I'm going to be running for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Foundation, but other people are going to be mostly doing different mental health funds. So if you want that information, here, I'll pop it up on the screen. I'll put it in the description as well. The event will be happening the week of October 4th. October 4th is my run, but other people will be running the days before and after it. Outside of that, I want to give a special thanks to a few people. First off, thank you very much to Hexalotl and Yorkar. Both of them helped with script writing and editing, that sort of thing. I want to thank Cosmic Biolith and a herd of Yoshi for helping out with some draft comments. And I want to thank Dr. Decomposing for giving us that beautiful musical rendition of In the Arms of an Angel, as well as Ignoring Tree for helping out with some of the thumbnail stuff for the video. And Melvo for Mighty Melvo, also on Twitch, for some general video advice. So, outside of that, we're done here. Thank you very much. Goodbye.